How you doing? My name's Thomas Cucuzella, and for this week's guided discussion, I'm going to be talking about the film Entrance. It's a 2011 movie. It was directed by Dallas Howman and Patrick Hovath. Horvath, sorry. Um, so I'm going to give a brief overview of the movie and then talk about a couple of the key points and uh, horror concepts that I noticed throughout the movie and some things that strayed away from the norm. So the movie starts out. It's a almost like a found footage film. It felt like to me. Very shaky cameras, grainy look. Didn't look like it was from 2011. Actually, I had to go back and double check the date when I first started watching. I thought it was a much older movie based on the quality of the video. But for the film, it starts off following the main character. His name is Susie. She's a young coffee shop worker who lives in Los Angeles. She has a roommate named Karen. They live together. Susie has a dog named Daryl, who she is quite fond of and quite attached to. So the film starts out with going over her basic everyday routine. Every morning she wakes up, she feeds the dog, she makes a pot of coffee, she walks to her job, walks home, and spends the night at the house most of the time. Her roommate has a boyfriend. They go out, they do things, but Susie seems to be stuck in this rut of life where, she doesn't really do much outside of the norm. During parts of the film, you'll notice, the screen goes black, and it's supposed to be Susie sleeping at nighttime, and you'll hear, floors creak or something like that. Or there's at one point, Susie sleeping on the couch or in her bed. I apologize, in her bed, and a photo is taken of her, and it's all from the perspective of an unknown observer, essentially. Um, During Susie's days, as she walks to work, she's um, confronted by groups of young men. She walking home one night from a bar. She is followed by a car, looked like a Volkswagen. The car stopped, backed up, and followed her as she turned around. She turned around a second time, and they continued to follow her. So she lived a quite an anxious life, but that is just something that I feel happens in a place like Los Angeles. You get some creepy people out there sometimes. It gets to a point in the movie where you're back to the whole black screen. Susie's sleeping, and you hear the dog's collar move. So every morning that Susie woke up, the dog was in the bed, and she could see him in the mirror in her room. So when she woke up this morning, you heard the dog move at night, and then you didn't see the dog in the morning. So for the next couple of days, she's out, she's spreading posters, looking for this dog that she is so fond of, that she loves so much. And it gets to the point where her roommate tells her she kind of has to move on, and there's a good chance that the dog's not coming back, and this really just breaks her down to a point where she's quite upset. She doesn't go out. She starts staying home from work and things like that. And then after a while, she starts to get back out there. She actually ends up going out, has a one night stand with somebody at a bar, thinking that it would be something more special. But she wakes up in the morning to make him coffee, and she sees him sneaking out the door. And he said he didn't really know how to handle this, so he just left. So again, things like that, they all built up to the point where Susie was not happy with her life, and she eventually confronts her roommate Karen and says that she's no longer happy living out here, and that she wants to move back to her home, where she came from. I can't remember exactly where it was. So they decide to have a big going away party for Susie. Karen invites a bunch of her friends over, boyfriend, things like that, friends from work. And they invite a young man named Jonathan over, who was one of Susie's coworkers at the coffee shop. He seems to be very interested in Susie. Susie doesn't really want to give him the time of day. He seems a little off-putting to her. So party's going on. Susie's trying to avoid awkward situations with Jonathan, and he actually confronts her about saying, "Do you feel uncomfortable with me being here?" And she plays it off as being okay. So as the night goes on, eventually the power goes out, and Susie goes to the garage to flip the breaker boxes, where she switches them on, and she's getting most of the house back on. And as soon as the garage lights come on, you see a masked man behind her. grabs her, knocks her out, ends up binding her up with duct tape and zip ties. And then her friend Karen comes upstairs to investigate why it's taking her so long to come back down. The masked intruder ends up killing Karen, stabs her to death with a set of scissors that he found on the bedstand next to her. This is really where the horror begins in the movie, which is honestly in the last about 20 minutes of the film. The last 20 minutes actually is one continuous shot, which is very impressive. Something in filmmaking when they can do one long take like that without having to do any redos. So the friend is killed, and Susie pretends to be passed out at this point, and the masked man tells her that he's going to kill the rest of her friends, and then he's going to come back, and the two of them are going to be together. So she regains consciousness after he goes downstairs, and she sees that Jonathan, who most people would probably think would be the killer, is actually dead in the garage with her. So she tries to get his phone out of his pocket, gets it out, but because her hands are bound with duct tape and behind her back, she isn't actually able to open the phone, and she can't call for help. She actually drops the phone in Jonathan's blood, and she just leaves it at that point. She walks down the stairs to find, she walks down the stairs to walk back upstairs, it looked like in the film, to find, I believe it was Karen's boyfriend at the front door. He had an axe sticking out of his head, so he was dead in front of the door. Obviously, Susie wasn't able to escape through the front door because his body was in the way, and she couldn't get the door enough leverage from their hands behind her back to open the door herself. From there, Susie continues to go to the kitchen, where she sees the kitchen door to the backyard is open, so she tries to escape there, but she hears the masked man coming back up the stairs from outside. So she hides in one of the second bedrooms of the home, sees the masked intruder go down the stairs, closes the door behind him into the kitchen. So he goes down the stairs, assuming to go back to Susie. So as Susie hears him go downstairs, she runs into the kitchen, where she finds one of her other friends who's partially alive, stuck in the kitchen with a knife in her stomach. Susie then tries to open the door. It doesn't seem openable, so she crawls through the doggy door that was in the back of the kitchen. She gets out, and then she tries to help her friend get out, who was stabbed in the stomach. But as she gets out of the doggy door, she stands up, looks through the kitchen door, and she sees the masked intruder there with the axe that was in Karen's boyfriend's head in the earlier part of the scene. And she tries to pull her friend out, but you see the masked man kill Susie's friend right there. Blood splatters up against the door itself, so Susie starts to run away. She finds her last two friends who were outside on the hammock together. They're impaled by what looked like a piece of rebar, impaled through both of them. And again, she's helpless at this point, unable to remove anything. Her hands are still bound behind her back. So Susie goes back and forth, weaving throughout the yard, trying to find a way out. Eventually, she's cornered on the top patio, where the masked man comes up with the axe, and Susie tries to get around him, can't, obviously. The man puts the axe down, gets close to Susie, grabs her, pulls her head towards him, and forces her to look at the city together as almost like a romantic thing. Obviously, in this killer's head, it was something more romantic than Susie could imagine. So there was a couple key concepts in this film that I thought were interesting. The whole idea that none of the actual blood and gore happened until the very last end of the movie. There was creepy things that did occur throughout the movie, but the horror itself didn't exactly happen until the end. One of the big things that upset me and caused me to feel uncomfortable was when Susie lost her dog Daryl. So she was just completely heartbroken, heartstruck about the dog, and you could sense, everyone's had a pet at some point in their life probably that can relate to the feeling of losing an animal. So to watch that and to watch her just go through this deeper and deeper stages of depression and regret, not being able to find her dog, that was pretty hard to watch. And it actually reminded me of a scene from Sandman where they were talking about how they're able to film those underground horror films. And they said, it's just people, it's fake. But when you watch a dog or an animal get hurt in a movie, it generally upsets people more than when people are hurt. So when people are hurt in a movie, you know for a fact that they're 99% chance they're not actually getting hurt. But when an animal's hurt, there's still that thing in the back of your head of saying, well, what if they actually did harm an animal during this movie? So I feel like that related to this as well. The film work itself of the one continuous shot at the end was very nice. Again, I like to see that actors are able to do the whole scene in one take. And what was interesting, and in my opinion, like a little twist of fate, we're always shown the lone survivor of a horror film, and it's normally a female character who overcomes the odds and is able to defeat the villain of some sort. But in this case, the villain had no intentions of actually harming Susie. So she is a lone survivor, but is she really surviving? Now she's this man's captive, and God knows what is going to happen to her. This man seems to have a very disillusioned sense of romance or relationships or something like that, where he's going to force Susie into a relationship. So that in itself has, and that's where this movie cuts out, is that final scene of them gazing out into the city together. She's still crying and whimpering, unable to get away and not sure what is going to happen to her. And the audience is left unknowing of what's going to happen to her. So something like that, I feel the human mind and the audience's mind leaves them to their own imagination. And I feel like that, in its sense, is a better way to predict horror or portray horror, where your wildest fantasies are what can come true. It's the director doesn't guide you one way or the other, so you're left to only think about what horrible things are going to happen to her. Overall, I really did enjoy the movie. Thought it was a well put together movie, and it had very good concepts of horror that I saw throughout this course so far put into play, but they also turned some of them on their heads again. The big one being the lone survivor, but is she actually a survivor being held captive now at this point? So overall, I really liked the movie, and I hope you enjoy it as well.